Imagine your loved one, a mother or father, husband or wife, sister or brother, is killed, the victim of state violence or a suicide bomber. How could the ensuing pain and loss ever be used as a catalyst for positive change? And how might that singular event become the foundation for a peace movement? The Parents Circle Families Forum, confronting the violence in Israel-Palestine, one bereaved family at a time. Ahead on Wide Angle. The Middle East peace process, which has fitfully started and stopped, though mostly stalled, since the mid-1970s, is an enterprise largely conducted by diplomats intent on gaining an upper hand. But what would the dialogue sound like if the people negotiating were instead those who felt they had lost that which was dearest to them, a beloved family member? Might they feel more compelled to bring an end to the violence, to give in some in order to get peace? Joining me today is Robi Damelin, a member of and the Israeli spokesperson for the Parents Circle Families Forum, a group of some 600 Israeli and Palestinian families who have lost close family members to the violence and who now work together for reconciliation and a just resolution to the conflict. She regularly contributes to the Forward and Huffington Post and was selected in 2014 by the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice as one of 4 women peacemakers. Welcome to Wide Angle, Robi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you. For context, please allow me to offer our viewers some broad strokes regarding your loss, because I think it would be valuable for them to know sort of what part of what your journey has been. It was back on March 3rd, 2002, your then 29-year-old son, David, was a lieutenant in the Israel Defense Forces. He and his team were stationed at a roadblock, I believe, outside the city of Ofra, which is in the West Bank, when a sniper, later found to be Palestinian, opened fire, killing 10, including David, wounding 4 others. Is that a pretty good sense of the broad strokes of that event that started you on this journey?
Well, the logistics are correct, but the fact is that David wasn't in the army then. He was in the reserves. He was a student at Tel Aviv University.
Okay.
And he was studying for his master's in the philosophy of education.
Right.
And he was called to reserves, as all young Israelis are after the army. So, of course, there was this great dilemma, should he go or shouldn't he? Right. Because he didn't want to serve in the occupied territories. Mm-hmm. And he came to see me and said, what shall I do? If I don't go, then what will happen to my students? Because he was teaching philosophy to young kids. Mm-hmm. You know, is that the right example? Because they were going to be inducted into the army. Mm-hmm. And if I don't go, what happens to my soldiers? Yeah. Because he was the officer. Right. And if I go, then I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. You don't know who the person is behind the gun.
Of course.
You know, you have to be terribly careful about what you say. And of course, I didn't want him to go. And I can tell you that when the army came to tell me that David had been killed, it seems that one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child.
Right. And that's
I didn't know that afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's certainly a piece that's so compelling, yeah? Just taking a look since the year 2000, I gather, but somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 Israelis and Palestinians, and it depends on who's counting, yeah, have been killed by Middle East violence. So your experience, regrettably, as tragic and unnecessary as I think certainly it is not at all, is shared by many, yeah? And that comment, that immediate move to, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child, how did you get to that place, number one? And I guess beyond that, how did you how did you attempt to realize what was a very different path than many before you had traveled?
Well, I think in many ways, as you've probably recognized by now, my accent is not exactly very Israeli.
There is that.
So
Yep.
I was pretty much influenced by my whole background in South Africa,
Right.
where I was part of the anti-apartheid movement. So I didn't become another person after David was killed.
Okay, fair
What
enough.
did happen is perhaps I became more compassionate. So I don't know, I knew immediately almost that the man who killed David didn't kill him because he was David. If he had met him, he never could have done that.
Of course.
He killed him because he was a representative of an occupying army. Please, that's not such an easy thing to say, but it's the truth. And so I don't know how other people react, but this was my immediate reaction. And I knew almost a month or maybe even before that I wanted to do something that would prevent other families from experiencing this pain, both Israeli and Palestinian. I just didn't have a framework until this religious man came to invite me to a seminar in East Jerusalem of Palestinian and Israeli bereaved families.
Okay.
And he was quite a thoughtful character because I didn't really want to mix with other bereaved families because I thought I've got enough on my own shoulders.
Sure.
But I realized then how much more important it was for me to really mix with other parents who actually understood what loss means.
Right.
Because it's something that most people can't understand.
Of course, of course. So certainly those were people, both Israelis and Palestinians, who had the experience of significant loss. And yet, certainly many of them had preconceptions, I think probably fostered by 2 generations of violence and separation, both individually as well as societally, between Israelis and Palestinians. One story that strikes me from your website, Taking Steps for Peace, was the story of a Palestinian woman whose father, I believe, was killed by an Israeli settler. And her comment was that she thought most Israelis were violent murderers. So this story and this narrative has been built up over generations that vilifies. What's that? I'm sorry.
It's a joint narrative. Each person has their own interpretation of history.
Sure.
Actually, one of the projects that we run in the Parent Circle is called History Through the Human Eye, because that's where you begin to understand that for me, looking at 1948 would be the War of Independence, but it would be the independence of Israel. Right. But for a Palestinian, it's the Nakba, the catastrophe when they were forced out of their homes. Right. So how would you look at this, and how much more important it would be for a road to compromise if you can understand how your so-called enemy sees their history? Right. Because there's such a cutoff between Israel and Palestine that we hardly know each other. You know, I travel a lot around the West Bank. The other day I was in this very, very poor village in a women's meeting. I believe that women must come to the table now. Yeah. So I went to this meeting with a Palestinian partner, and it was a very aggressive meeting because these women have never met an Israeli who's not in uniform or who isn't a settler. Why would they think I'm any different? Right. And it was interesting because the 3 most aggressive women, what were their names? Compassion, forgiving, and grace.
Beautiful.
And that was a wonderful way to start the meeting because I just asked them what their names meant.
Right, right. So that certainly is one of the functions of the Parent Circle Families Forum, is to personalize the other, as it were, and to put a face and a story. Okay, all right. However, that said, I imagine that simply working with the other can be exceedingly problematic for members of the Parent Circle. So a question for you certainly is, how are you perceived by fellow Jews, and how are Palestinians viewed by fellow Palestinians who are part of the parents' circle?
Well, there's a certain standing in the community on both sides. So, yes, there are many who write terrible talkbacks to me and say I should burn in Auschwitz and other charming sentences. Yeah. But there is a certain standard. I mean, I paid a very high price to say what I say and to do what I do. Right. And as for the Palestinians, 90% of the men in our group have been to jail for a serious amount of time, have lost an immediate family member. Nobody can think that they are fraternizing with the enemy. They understand that this is the way they look for peace. So, you know, it's in one way a way for us to work in both communities. Yeah. Of course, there are a lot of very angry people who don't want to hear this message, but those are the people we must talk to, otherwise they'll become more radical.
Yeah. And do you sense that there's some progress and some sense of a more growing acceptance of the message and the work of the Parents Circle?
Well, I think I can give you an example. It's interesting. It doesn't mean that the government and that the people in Israel are not going more to the right. And by the way, the Parents Circle is not affiliated to any political party. Right. Of course, we are all political people. I won't deny that.
Yeah.
But every year on Veterans Day, unlike the Americans, we don't have sales. We have alternate. Sorry, that's a little dig that I have to get in every time I talk.
Fair enough.
Okay, so what we do is we have an alternate ceremony, which is on Memorial Day, which is basically for Israeli soldiers. Okay. So this started 12 years ago, and maybe 200 people came the first time, and there was a lot of slack from the audience and from people around who were very angry. How dare we do this? How can we invite bereaved Palestinian families as well? Right. And then this year, the 12th year, we had more than 5,000 people came to the ceremony, and we broadcast it live all over the world. But the sad part was that, you know, in many cases, the Israeli government says there's no one to talk to. And actually 200 Palestinians was meant to come for the ceremony, and they didn't get permission to travel. So we didn't know what to do. So what we did do is we ran another ceremony at the same time in the West Bank. And so there were two alternate ceremonies, and actually more than 800 people came to the ceremony in Palestine, which was extraordinary because it was in the middle of the Palestinian hunger strike for the prisoners. Okay. You know, it's a prisoner strike. And of course, the ceremony was amazing, and I wish that these people standing outside screaming and spitting and throwing urine would have come inside. There was a big sort of barricade between the police and them and us. Otherwise, I would have got to invite them in, because, you know, those are the people we need to talk to.
Sure. You had the opportunity to give a TEDx talk, yeah? And
in 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes, which was a trick, although you did very well. And in it, you explained sort of the journey of finding out who the person was who had shot David, and actually deciding to write him, and exploring the possibilities of actually visiting him and having a face-to-face with him. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, Robi, and a little bit maybe about what it taught you about the possibilities of reconciliation?
Well, it's a long story, but you said the TEDx talk, 5 minutes.
Right.
All the people, Palestinians in the group, reckon that if the Hamas will capture me, will kidnap me, they'll send me back after half an hour because I talk so much. So the 5 minutes was a big deal. When they caught the man who killed David, that's when my life became very difficult. Yeah. Because there was now a face. Yeah. I had been going all over the world talking about peace and reconciliation, and all of those lovely words, but did I really mean it? And this was a huge test for me, was my own integrity and who am I and what have I done, and do I really mean it? Right. And it took me 3 months, and I wrote a letter to the family of the man who killed David. And of course, they were very shocked. 2 Palestinians from our group delivered it. And there's no such thing as instant reconciliation. You know, people, it's not coffee. Okay. You wait, and some Palestinians from our group delivered the letter to the family. And I imagined the next day, in my great wisdom, that there would be a letter in the post from Thaya, that's the name of the sniper. But of course there wasn't, and it took a very long time for him to send me an answer, which came over the Palestinian website. And it was not exactly a letter from Martin Luther King. Okay, it was a very angry letter that said that I was mad and I should stay away from his family, and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But you see, I knew that he had, as a little boy, seen his uncle very violently killed by the Israeli army. And then he lost 2 uncles in the second uprising. So he went on a path of revenge. And he wasn't actually affiliated to either of the political, he wasn't Hamas, he wasn't Fatah. But he chose to go to the Fatah wing of jail. The Fatah and Hamas are separated in Palestine, in Israeli jails. And actually, the extraordinary thing is, once I'd written that letter, it was as if I became free. You know, I was no longer a victim of this man. It didn't matter what he would say or do, because my life is not contingent on who he is.
We're going to take a quick break here, Robi, and ask viewers to join us on the other side, where we'll continue our discussion about the Parent Circle as a tool of peace in the Middle East.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. For information about this episode or to view other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wideangle.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I'm Peter Bermudez, speaking today with Robi Damelin about how bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families might collectively use their shared loss as a bridge to peace. You spoke earlier, Robi, about how Parent Circle Families Forum is not a political organization. And yet around, I'm sure that all of the members, and you allowed, that the members have ideas about how the statehood question in Israel-Palestine should be resolved, yeah? And I gather that most of the members of the organization would come down on a 2-state solution for 2 peoples, yeah? In this very show about a year ago, I had 2 guests, one of whom was an American academic, as well as an American Jew, who had lost a significant portion of her family in the Holocaust, and whose family subsequently settled in the United States, as opposed to the new Israel after the end of World War II. The other guest was a Palestinian scholar working in the States, who still has family in the occupied territories in the West Bank. Both of them felt that a 1-state solution could provide lasting peace. And I know, obviously, that there is space for intelligent, compassionate people to hold different positions. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the future form of Israel-Palestine might be impacted by the statehood question, whether it be 1 state or 2 states.
Well, firstly, you're quite right. The 2-state solution is what we talk about. If you think about it, a 1-state solution, if it was an ideal world, that would be an ideal solution. The thing is that, I look at why Israel exists in the first place. Where do Jews come from here? I make a counter offer for somebody who wants the 1-state solution. And I say, okay, if we have a 1-state solution in an ideal world, which it isn't, then I have 100,000 Russian Jews. I've got like 20,000 Falashmora Ethiopian Jews. I now have a whole bunch of French Jews who can't walk down the street with a kippah. anymore. I can throw in some from Argentina, probably Venezuela. All of these Jews will be looking for a home. Are you willing to open your doors to these people? Because you weren't willing some 70 years ago. I probably wouldn't be here. So that's just one answer to that. And I think, personally, I think we need to get divorced. Maybe we can get remarried again afterwards. But in the meantime, I think Palestinians, from what I can gather from what they tell me, is that they would like to have their own state. It's time, you know, and they need a freedom of movement and a freedom of choice. That's a basic human right.
Sure. And I assume, Robi, that following this divorce, you know, organizations such as Parent Circle continue to exist to facilitate a conversation so that the walls don't continue to exist between the two peoples, yes, in two separate states.
Well, firstly, the long-term vision of this whole organization, I mean, what is our reason for being, is that we believe that there must be a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any future political peace agreement. Otherwise, it's another ceasefire until the next time. Look what happened. We stood on the White House lawn, we hugged each other, we ate hummus, and nothing came out of it except more anger, more death. And we don't want to share this land with graves. We need to find a way to compromise.
I'm assuming certainly there are viewers who are engaged by this story and are interested either in learning more and conceivably supporting an organization like Parent Circle Families Forum. What resources would you recommend, and how can people connect with Parent Circle?
We have an American Friends of the Parent Circle. And that would be great if they would like to get a newsletter in English of what's happening. And we do, from time to time, raise money. For instance, we have a summer camp, which is the most extraordinary, you know, I have a grandson of 14. Well, now he's 15, but when he started with us, he was 14. And he's just a basketball maniac. I can't give another description. And he couldn't have cared less about the whole situation. And there was a trip to Italy with Palestinian and Italian kids. And suddenly he met Palestinian children. And he came back and he started to talk to me about the right of return, about prisoners, about Jerusalem, did I think. Then he came to that alternate ceremony that I told you about. And he said, you know what, Safta means granny. This is the most moving thing I ever went to, and now I'm with you all the way. And then he went to the summer camp. And the saddest part is he came back, and then he was 14, and another 14-year-old kid said to him, a Palestinian, tell me, Nadav, what will you do when you go to the army if they give you a gun? Will you shoot me? So then Nadav said, no, I would go to prison. But he doesn't know what will happen when he's 18. And think about, this is the crux of the matter. What are we doing to our children that when they are 14, they are asking each other whether they would kill each other? That's something for your listeners or the people in the audience to think about. And I think, you know, with what's going on also in America now, you have to be aware that you must embrace the people that you must do not talk to into your conversation. Otherwise, they're going to become much more radical than they ever were. They must get to know each other.
Well, and I sense that was a significant step forward in terms of as heartbreaking as it is to have 14-year-olds having that discussion. I suppose it yet is a point of light insofar as it's a 14-year-old Israeli having the conversation with a friend who happens to be a 14-year-old Palestinian. And I imagine those conversations have not been so typical.
They are very, very rare. If you will go in, we work in Israeli schools. If you go into an Israeli school, we talk to 17-year-olds, 16, 17, before they go to the army. And I would walk into a classroom with a Palestinian and I would say to them, who of you have ever met a Palestinian? Probably nobody in the whole class. and who speaks Arabic, maybe one because their granny came from Iraq, and who's been overseas, most of the class. So why would they know anything about the other? And it's probably the first time that they experience the humanity of the Palestinian when he tells the story of his road to transformation and reconciliation.
Yeah.
It's incredible to see this, what happens to these kids. I mean, of course, they don't become Gandhi,
right.
You know, but they do sense that there's a human being on the other side, and maybe for the first time they'll realize that.
Exactly.
And that's a terribly important part of our work as well.
Right. I thank you certainly for your time today and talking with me. More importantly, I thank you for, gracious, 15 years it's been in Israel, and it sounds like some time before that as part of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So an ongoing commitment to trying to get people together and seeing each other as humans. I thank you for illuminating the possibilities of that path for us and wish you all the successes. Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Absolutely.
hosting me. Thank you.
Absolutely. We humans tend to judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. It's the consequence of having only one set of eyes through which to perceive the world. And from this limited perspective, we tend to spin stories that support and augment our views, even though they may not serve us, and even when they diverge from reality. Fully aware of this, the Parent Circle Families Forum has skillfully provided a means by which loss and pain become tools of empathy that allow its members to see the humanity of the other. From whatever tradition you follow, even if you follow none, pray they meet their measure of success. No new members. On behalf of Robi Damelin, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.